Hey everyone, welcome to the Get Marketing podcast series. I am your host, John, and I am excited to be with you here today. Remember to rate, subscribe, and share these videos with your friends and colleagues. Well, I am really excited to be back on board with you today with a good friend and colleague, Yvan Lamoureux, the CEO and founder of Crankworks. Yvan, thanks so much for taking some time to join me today.
Yeah, no, it's great to be here. I'm happy that we got a chance to finally get together and talk about some of this stuff.
Absolutely. And I think this is a really relevant conversation for our audience because as we move into the holiday season, 2020 saw unprecedented growth in the e-commerce space, obviously with some, social and economic impact from the pandemic. But I think that trend has really been moving that way for several years. And maybe that was the final tipping point for people who were on the fence about potentially making online purchases. Now it seems to be the standard and the norm. As we move forward, I think this is important for brands and businesses to really consider how they market online and how people consume information, products, services, data, etc., and what that means for them moving forward. So in the pre-show, we were talking about a couple of different stats and points, which I thought were fascinating that maybe I didn't even really know how big some of these numbers are. I wonder if you could share with the audience a few specifics around the shift that has happened in online e-commerce and engagement online.
Yeah, sure. No problem. It's really interesting. We know that, for instance, Amazon, especially with COVID, that we've all gone through most recently, just blew up, right? But overall, like in 2020, sales were more than doubled at, plus 168% compared to October of the same year. The Cyber Month for 2020, sales were up 29% versus 2019. Like these are some substantial numbers. Like people both in North America, and I mean Canada and the US, Crankworks is stationed in Canada, are increasingly coming online to make their purchases for family, friends, and, work sometimes.
So how does this affect a brand when they present themselves online? How critical is it for them to focus on that first touch point and basically, thinking through how someone engages with their customer message and experience? I mean, we've talked about this in marketing for years. It's always been important when we talk about personas and storytelling. Has that now shifted to where it's not an option for how someone engages with your brand online?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. There was a time, say 15 years ago, where we talked about how bricks and mortar stores were a different entity to online business. We're finally seeing the merger of both those supply chains. And the tools are out there to use. Sites, you can build your site, for instance, in Shopify, where you can streamline just how you're going to deliver those products and where they find themselves, how they display. But really, I would say it's all about trust elements.
I think that's a great pullout that you made there. Especially in today's climate, we've had, obvious the big stories about Facebook and data sharing and privacy, et cetera. Building trust and keeping trust online, I would say, and I think that that's really going to be the biggest point for brands moving forward is how to build that trust and maybe build some of that trust back and encourage users that are online to be comfortable making purchases, engaging with information. I wonder, what are some of the opportunities for these brands and advertisers now that the landscape is shifting towards a younger demographic that does have purchasing power as they kind of grew up with the internet? They're a little bit more, savvy, they understand it. But there are now these opportunities for those individuals to engage with a brand and for a brand to make that potential, to bridge that gap to potentially that purchaser that they didn't have in the past.
Yeah, I mean, we can always, wax poetic about how you have to be younger and hipper to attract that audience. But, fundamentally, it's still about good design, designing things that feel human, sound human, and conveys transparency around your brand. And, you should really point to third-party reviews where you can. And I mean, if you need help on figuring out just how to do that, you can go to sites like Trustpilot or FIFO, FEEFO.
No, that's a great point. And I think part of what you mentioned about the design element is key as well. A number of, larger brands obviously are trying to make this shift. Maybe they're moving more slowly. But smaller, more aggressive, more agile brands are obviously embracing even new social media outlets like TikTok and Instagram as it's moved into its Reels feature, etc. From a design perspective, I would think, and obviously I'm sure you would agree, that good design has to be laid out across your digital channels. So no longer are you just designing a landing page or a home page or even the customer journey on the website, but that's got to be focused on mobile and that mobile experience and how people are consuming media across different, streaming potential platforms as well. And, that obviously digital advertising space. How does good design transfer across different platforms that might have even a different tactile approach, right? A phone is a certain size, a website is a different, screen size on a laptop or desktop. How does that transfer, and how do you remain consistent with that trust, like you mentioned, across those different platforms?
Well, that's really interesting. That's more of an integrated design or branding strategy. What you're referring to, and what that means is making everything look, sound, feel, and even smell the same, no matter where they live. Like, believe it or not, if you're in a retail environment, smell does play a part in your brand. There are large retailers that actually pump certain smells through their ventilation systems to give you either perhaps a leathery smell in a man's store or a more perfume kind of like feeling in a lady's lingerie store. And I won't mention.
I think we all remember those. We all remember those Abercrombie and Fitch stores in the late '90s, early 2000s, right?
Exactly. So, but,
it was oppressive.
Exactly. So, but integrated branding. It's like we're talking about brand voice in terms of how you write for your brand online, possibly in other read media. Like, you want to start collecting not just keywords, because that's all the buzz, right? Like, how do you rank higher? But you have to create a personality, and it's about what words you choose to use most often. And what you try to do is sow those types of words throughout your content. In terms of visual branding, we know these structures as being color. It could be also the feel. Not everyone needs skater art to be cool online, right? If you're a bank or an IBM, you're going to go with something a little more conservative, strong. But one thing that seems to be crisp, clean design seems to be across the board, and really highlighting the product in any way you can and giving it front center position. It's funny. I had an uncle who had a small retail shop, and you know what? He always put the thing that was of the highest value in the middle of the store window, and the stuff that people purchased most often outside of view. That first thing becomes aspirational or inspirational for some, knowing that the other products will move. Like, these are like, tried and true ways. And what you want to do is integrate that kind of philosophy throughout everything you do. That's the whole idea of integrated branding.
It's really fascinating, especially when you think about the holiday season, which we're coming into now, and obviously with Black Friday coming up. And then, of course, the Christmas holidays. Obviously, these are big times for online brands, retailers, shoppers, et cetera, that are looking. And again, as we said, back in the day, like if you're going into brick and mortar retail, there were these kinds of tips and tricks that were used to present products and services in that aspirational way. I mean, obviously, everybody's seen, the Miracle on 34th Street and thinks of Macy's and Gimbals and these, classic cases of big retailers battling it out to present product. Sometimes that's led to that race to the bottom, and there are certainly shoppers that are looking for best price. But when we're talking about building integrated brands online and talking about building aspirational brands, this is something I think in moving now into a space where maybe 90% of purchases will be made online, potentially, or at least 90 to 100% potentially of the research done before purchases are going to be made online, even if somebody does go to a retail brick and mortar store. This idea of positioning your products or your services, or like you said, building trust, I'd like to learn how brands could do that more efficiently and more effectively through their storytelling. And I'm sure, with how you build, sites and develop brands and talk through these big pieces with them, what are some of the key points that you tell them to pull out how to present their value and present that trust, like you said, or build that trust in an aspirational way?
Oh, that's interesting. Like, I think part of it is, showing some vulnerability, right? It doesn't
Hmm.
mean, doing away with any, how can I put it, structure to your content. Like, you're not going to all of a sudden start embracing typos, but go ahead and, be willing to soft launch, and share the label,
Hmm.
the site, the products, the apps in some sort of beta form, and let your
Hmm.
audience help shape your message. And that is the new opportunity today. With all the social paradigm that's going on, where there's an interaction and dialogue, as advertising, we all talk about how, as advertisers, pardon me, we all talk about how it's no longer a one-way medium, but it's to really embrace that and make the
Hmm.
audience part of the experience, and talk about that shared experience. You know, acknowledge their frustrations,
Hmm.
get right to the facts, share some experience. It's about getting in touch with who you're selling to, because effectively you're not as effective as a brand if you're not solving some type of problem for them or enriching their lives.
Sure. Sure. No, I think that's extremely important, and I do see a trend now as we move forward with, several cultural effects as well, i.e., health and wellness, mental health. These are very big, large, trending spaces that a lot of brands are trying to connect with. And I think sometimes it's done really well. And I think sometimes it's where, you don't want to be seen as just latching on to something that's kind of a hot topic or trend. So the concept that you mentioned about vulnerability and building trust is also wrapped into who you are as that authentic brand, right? I think there are companies that have done this really well, and companies that have maybe not done it so well. But the great advertisements, or the companies that we think of even around the holidays, right? Mercedes has done a great job with simple branding around the Santa Claus theme. It's a car company, but they took the idea of transportation and built trust around, well, everybody trusts that Santa Claus is going to make it.
Make the
Hopefully,
trip.
that's what we think every year. He's going to make the trip. So connecting your brand Mercedes with that, I thought was always a brilliant marketing piece for them. How do brands align themselves more effectively with these kinds of topics and trends? I mean, like we said, Black Friday shopping is predominantly clothing, accessories, electronics come in at number two. 94, some of these stats here, 94% of millennials plan to spend 11 billion on electronics in this upcoming holiday season. I mean, that's huge, right?
Right.
And electronics may not necessarily be a sexy type of brand, or a brand that's seen as a more emotional, right? Like a mental health or wellness, etc. So how do brands, kind of latch onto some of these core pieces that people find and they want to be a part of, to tell that story more
So
effectively?
yeah, no, that's a great question. I mean, like, obviously something like Santa Claus is an emotional trigger, and
Right.
traditionally we have these in our, how can I, community, or how can I put it? Well, it's a story that we tell ourselves. Within our culture, within our community, within our
Hmm.
cities, within our, you know, it's you gotta it's referred to sometimes as groupthink. And what I mean by
Mm.
that is how people think about certain storytelling and what that means to them, right? When you have someone as iconic as Santa Claus to draw from, there is things that people immediately relate to, but you have to be careful. You want to marry your brand with the right story, and there's nothing wrong with borrowing, like from Santa Claus. I mean, we do it all the
Hmm.
time with sports celebrities or different types of celebrities, where we're almost like drawing from their karma to endorse the brand, right? And it's an
Sure.
often done thing. However, you got like those types of endorsements can be fleeting or can be seasonal. If you were a medium sized brand or a small company, you want to think long term. and think
Hmm.
about how you can gauge. So instead of maybe Santa Claus in particular, it's Christmas overall and the various meanings.
Mm.
So you can reiterate that same story in a different fashion year over year. Um, and the other thing you seem to talk around is this whole idea of accessibility as well, like
Mm.
bringing that
Sure.
accessibility layer into things for people who have certain difficulties. The web was supposed to open the world to everyone in the universe. We're still struggling with making web content on websites accessible to all, like with people with visual impairments, reading
Right.
impairments, what have you. But we're getting there, and there's great resources on that as well online.
Those are great points, and especially when you have a huge, a consumer season, which the holiday season tends to be, and as that's what we're coming to in the next couple of weeks. Those shout outs that you've made there in terms of making websites, information accessible, and being more transparent are all thematic pieces that not only are I think are trending and overarching in the global conversation as a whole right now, but that's I think the key of great design of something you mentioned, bringing it back to that point. Transparency, vulnerability, that's how you should be building your message and using the different tools or mediums, whether it's a mobile device, a web application, the website that tells your story, or infographics on social media. However you deliver your message, I think people are appreciating and engaging with brands that have that level of vulnerability, transparency, and are willing to engage and come back into the conversation, right? Respond to reviews, gain
Yeah,
reviews.
and something else that's very contemporary: keep your eye on your warehouse stock. If you're actually one of these companies that have a physical product rather than a service to sell,
Hmm.
because quite frankly, we've seen all kinds of struggles with shipments overseas. We've seen a
Sure.
slowdown of transportation. So this Black Friday, especially if you're a retailer, you're get of any scale, you're going to have to concern yourself with that more so than you may have in the past.
That's a fantastic point. I think that is definitely something worth, in terms of business overall. That's one of the ways that a lot of small companies or even startups can end up in some hot water is not realizing the scalability. Sometimes rapid and amazing revenue growth leads to some supply chain challenges. So I definitely think that's always something to pull out for our audiences, to think about here on the show. Ivan, this has been a really in-depth, engaging conversation. I wonder if there's a couple of key takeaways you could leave the audience with today. As like I said, we go into this Black Friday consumer season. Obviously, advertising and an online engagement is critical to businesses. Continuing to maintain and produce revenue online. A lot of businesses, this is their one time a year where they make all their revenue back. So, what are some specifics you could leave the audience with that they can kind of implement and take away, and maybe start working on the ground in their business tomorrow?
Yeah, no, it's really taking the time to understand your clientele. Remember, they've stayed indoors longer than they ever have before. They've just started retracing their steps, almost as it were,
Mm.
and getting back into their lives. I would say that, in the most liberal areas where COVID has not been considered to be an issue for a long area or a long time, they're only 80% back to their regular lives.
Mm.
So you have to facilitate them coming back to what's normal. If you can do anything in and around that by tying your products more directly to your bricks and mortar store, that would be an advantage, so that your website really, and make sure it's mobile, right? Make sure your website's mobile.
Yes.
Responsive is the other thing, so that it scales no matter the device, so that people can go straight from their homes to your store if in fact you are bricks and mortar. If you're not bricks and mortar, you're probably concerning yourself with just how you're going to distribute your product. Amazon is the new bar, and they're everywhere. They grew during that period, so they're just crushing it right now. And I'll leave you with this parting thought. We can make Friday green again is a new movement out there when it comes to Black Friday. where, it's about the environmental damage that Black Friday typically does. And people can start engaging, especially if they're into those alternative products, into that, like start researching that banner. There are groups on that, and start leveraging those opportunities.
Well, I love that last point. And I think as we think about, the sustainability of how the internet allows us to have the access to information, sustainability is a huge point. That's probably a whole show we could do on how, online advertising can promote sustainability just with the delivery of information.
Absolutely.
We need less trees, right? So to do online marketing, I think that's a great point, and I love that you're leaving that with the audience, especially as we go into the holiday season, where we start to consider, our family and our friends and what that means to us, and how we continue to maintain healthy, sustainable relationships. So that's a great point to end on. Yvan, thanks so much for taking some time to chat with us today in the audience. I certainly learned a lot. I think this was good for us to think about how we can make the internet more accessible, deliver our message and story for brands in a more effective and transparent, vulnerable way, like you mentioned. So thank you for taking some time with us today.
Okay. No, thanks for having me. This has been great. I look forward to doing this again.
Absolutely. And thank you, the audience, so much for tuning in. We always appreciate it. I certainly learned a lot, and I hope you did as well. Remember to rate, subscribe, and share these episodes. And if you loved our conversations, which I certainly did, I think Yvan and I are going to be back with a few more. You can keep us caffeinated, and you can send us some money on the Ko-Fi account that's in the comment section below, and engage with us. We'd love to hear from you. Check the link, and you can drop us a note there. If you do have any questions, check out the comment section for links to obviously the Blue Comet Media site and Crankworks, etc. There will be some information to contact Yvan as well. I really appreciate you guys dropping in again for an episode of the Get Marketing podcast, and I look forward to seeing you all get marketing in the digital space.